Hi church, this is that thing where middle of the week we look at a bit of the text, the story of Joseph, where we couldn't cover in the Sundays because we just don't have time. And we're looking right now at that bit that comes after Joseph reveals himself to his brothers in chapter 46, and before the kind of end of the story 50, which we'll do on Sunday. And this is where Joseph and his family, all his brothers and his dad and their kids and the rest of them, moved down into Egypt. There's like a couple of things to pick on here that's really interesting. So we'll do that quickly. So we're picking up at chapter 47, and it says, there we go, the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. And they acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Now, if you remember the story of Exodus and Moses bringing them out of Egypt, this is why they're in Egypt to start with, right? Because they've all been brought down there to save them from the famine and to grow into this huge, large number of people. So God brings them down to Egypt to rescue them, save them, and to make them this huge group of people. And then later on, God's going to have to rescue them from Egypt, from under the clutches of Pharaoh. But this is the start of that story. This is how they're growing there. So Jacob reached 147 years of age, and it says, when the time drew near for him to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if I have found favour in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh. I don't know why they did that, but that was a sign of a serious promise. And promise that you'll show me kindness and faithfulness. What's Joseph got to do to show him kindness and faithfulness? Don't bury me in Egypt. But when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. Now, this is important because God has promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then to their kids, he will give them the land of Canaan, the promised land, this perfect place. Egypt is not the promised land. So Jacob looks ahead and says, I know I'm not meant to be here. Temporary, God has brought us here for a reason, but I know I'm not meant to be here. So I want my body to be buried there. And again, this is part of the story of Joseph is telling God's people, how is it that God's people grew so big? And how is it they're in Egypt so that God could rescue them from Egypt? And that's part of the story. So he swears that. And then there's this bit I love, and I don't know quite why I love it. It says, Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Israel is another name for Jacob, right? And something that Jacob's been pretty horrible as a character all the way through. You never quite root for him. He's someone you read and think, gosh, this guy doesn't seem like you'd want to hang out with him. And yet here at the end of his life, you see finally he's realised God's good promises for him. And now he's worshipping as an old man leaning upon his staff, trusting in God's goodness and his promises to him. And there's one final thing Jacob has to do before he dies, and that is he's going to bless God's people. The bit I'm skipping over now, chapter 48, is all about how Jacob blesses Joseph's kids, which is interesting, but I don't think we have time for. But then it gets into Genesis 49, he goes to bless. Jacob comes, his sons together, and says, I am going to bless you. So he brings all his sons together and he says, I'm going to bless them. And so let's look at them all one by one. So it says, Reuben, you're the firstborn, you're wonderful, great. However, you did defile your father's bread and you slept with one of Jacob's concubines. So he is kind of, yeah, you're blessed and great, but you're not going to be treated as the firstborn. The firstborn's important because they're the one who gets the inheritance. And then Simeon and Levi, these next two lines there. So again, you great, but you used your weapons to fight against people you shouldn't have done, and because of your violence, you were also not going to be there. And then it says, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You're a lion's cub, O Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. The scepter, this is really important, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. Judah is the one from whom the line of Jesus comes. Jesus is born into the line of Judah. In fact, the word Jew, as in the Jewish people, comes from Judah. They see themselves as children of Judah, because genetically they are children of Judah. But it says there that the ruler's staff will always be with Judah, so the kings come from Judah. But one day that ruler's staff will come to someone it belongs to, and the obedience of the nations is his. This is a promise of Jesus. One day Jesus will be born into the family of Judah, and then there will be no more kings. He'll be the final king, and he will have the obedience. It says there, he will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garment in wine. You see there's pictures there of what Jesus will do on the cross with the blood and the wine and the donkey coming, and still a prophecy of Jesus. Then there's talk of the other brothers here. You have Zebulun mentioned, Issachar, Dan, Gad. They're interesting to read if you want to, and if you're reading the Bible and wonder, why is this group of people, the people who are born of Dan, the people who are born of Gad, doing certain things? It's always worth referencing back to this, and you find what's going on there. And then Joseph's mentioned. Joseph's a fruitful vine, And his bow will remain steady, his strong arm stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you. That's a great blessing. Joseph's treated it as if he's the firstborn son. So Jesus is going to come from Judah, but Joseph's now the new firstborn son. Jacob's making him to receive the blessings of him. And so it says there, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. And then finally you get Benjamin, who's the last son. He's a ravenous wolf. Not sure I want to be called that by my dad. But there we go. So those are the blessings that poured out by Jacob upon his kids, pointing particularly, we see there with Judah, towards Jesus. And then the final thing it says here, he says, I'm about to die. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite. The cave, which is basically where Abraham's brought. So at this point, they basically, in that promised land, they own one tiny piece of land. They own a graveyard in the promised land. But they trust in God that they'll be brought back there. So Jacob says, please bury me there. I know God's going to give me this promised land one day. And then he gives his instructions, and then he dies. What can we learn from this? I mean, that God is faithful to his promises, the stuff he promises here, that he keeps all the way down the line, that God is going to give them promised land, that even a life like Jacob, which is full of terrible, terrible things, even that can be redeemed by God. And even there you can see worship and joy in Jacob's life. For all the torment he's gone and all the terrible things he's done, yet he can still worship his God.